to estimate the impact of policies or interventions. And the research I'm going to present to you right now is a bit atypical in the sense that first it's about language issues that are not very clearly an economic question. And second, it's a relatively small scale and experimental intervention. But what I usually do is much more running very large scale experiments with several hundred schools that are randomized into treatment or control, or hundreds of thousands unemployed people that receive emails, etc. Because we are usually testing not experimental process, but policies that have to be developed at scale, and we try to test them at scale. So what I do is usually very policy oriented. Maybe this one is a bit less because it's a much smaller experiment on something that was rather tentative. So this paper is about a project on text messages sent to parents. And in fact, it is a side project of a larger project that we implement in daycare centers in France, which is called Parler Bambin, and it's a project where we train professionals in daycare centers on language issues. But as a side product, we had this small project, and it's joined with Sophie Kern, who is a language scientist. She's the only specialist of the topic, in fact, in the team. And Clément Chaise-Martin and Quentin Daviau are economists like me. So what we looked at is an intervention that is set up by an NGO called Mille un mot, whose interest is into improving language learning of very young children. And this intervention targets pretty young children, 1 to 3 years old. And the nature of this intervention is to send text messages on parents' phones on which there are encouragements and information on how to stimulate children's language. And we send a text message 3 times per week for a relatively long period, for a whole academic year. And we also call the parents, a speech therapist calls the parents to discuss issues, and we also send children books to the families over the treatment period. So sometimes these are texts, sometimes these are links to videos, where you have examples of activities that you can do with your children. And so parental intervention is something that is extremely present in much of the literature, in cognitive science, in psychology, in education, in economics also. I think it's fair to say that the effects that you find in this literature are quite inconsistent. I'm not sure there is a very clear line of understanding of what you can do and what is working. Usually these are very difficult things to do, very expensive, because you have to touch the parents directly in person. Most of the experiments are of that kind. So there is an interest for something which is much lighter and less costly, which is sending text messages. And people have found positive effect of text messages, but in different contexts than ours, because it's typically on school-aged children. Text messages focused on reading acquisition. So more specific, more technical. So probably the context is a bit different, but we thought that there was maybe some chances that we could learn something, because other experiments seem to show that this light touch intervention may in fact have some effects. So the kind of questions you have are natural questions. First, do the text message influence parental practice? If it does, do you see any effects on children's development? And specifically, are there subpopulations for which it's more efficient than others? These are very simple questions. So I think the big problem in an experiment of that kind is to measure the outcomes and have instruments that measure the outcomes. The outcomes are very difficult to measure, especially, I think, the parental practices. So in this in this paper, it's fair to say we are a bit limited on the parental practices. We could have, we've talked about this, but it was not really realistic, but we could record the children at home and whatever interaction was going on. We even talked about this with people at DEC. But we didn't do it in that project. So we have a questionnaire of parental practices, a questionnaire from the literature, which is called the STEAM-Q. We also ask parents about a number of children outcomes regarding, in particular, the vocabulary, but also socio-affective measures. So I didn't translate EFDC and EDU have in fact English translations, but I don't have them in mind, and it's not there. I'm sorry. And then we have something I think more robust for children's outcome measured directly by tests implemented by psychologists in presence of the child in the daycare center. So we use the Brine-Levin and the WIPC, which are very standard tests. So we have those set of instruments through questionnaire and standard tests. So what we did is we are working in daycare center, which is maybe an issue. I'll go back to this in 1 minute. In the daycare center, we identified parents of very modest background, in the sense that poor parents. We identified a set of poor parents. We had about 400 of them. And we asked them if they would volunteer to enter this project. And among the guys who volunteered, the 400 who volunteered, in fact, I think 95% of the people we asked accepted to enter the experiment. We randomized exactly half of them into test and control. So it's randomization, it's stratified randomization within daycare centers. And they have to be parents of children between 12 and 34 months at the time of randomization, and targeted on low-income families, obviously. So because this is a very short presentation, that's the basic framework. So let me show you the effects we get by comparing treatment and control. What I show you is the effect on the parental practice on the category of parental practices, which is reading with their children. So we have a number of questions and we aggregate those questions. There are other dimensions like counting, naming objects, playing with letters, etc., for which we find no effect at all. So the only effects we find, if we find any, is for the reading practices. What we get from receiving those text messages over the year is a global effect on the whole sample of 15% of a standard deviation. Okay, so you probably know what measures of standard deviation means, so I will drop a discussion of this. Now, this is a rather small effect, and with our sample size, it's not significant. But we can look at natural subsamples, and in fact, those subsamples were announced in a pre-analysis plan. So these are not ad hoc subsamples. We announced them before looking into them. Less educated parents, parents who talk not only French at home, parents below the median income in our sample. So the poorest of the poorest. Relatively, and parents whose children were less than 2 years old at the time of randomization. Of course, except for the last one, the three subcategories are strongly correlated, although not perfectly, obviously, but they are strongly correlated. So we're capturing a little bit of the same thing in the various graphs here. What you see is that on those subsamples, we get coefficients that are twice as large, about 30% of the standard deviation. And depending on which one, I don't remember exactly, but generally sort of significant, maybe at the 10% level sometimes, but there is something going on. So basically, the bottom line here is that we do have effects on subset of parents, the poorest, the less educated, etc., and the parents of the younger children. There seems to have effects on their reading practices, which was the main target if not exclusive, of the intervention. But we don't have any effect, even in those subgroups, on children's performance, on children's outcomes, whatever the outcome, whether language related or more general psychological aspects. So the bottom line is we don't have those effects, and we have parental effects and subgroups. I mean, the size of the effects are not very large, right? 30% of the standard deviation is not bad, but it's not very impressive. So an interesting question for us is where does that come from? What can we think about this? How can we interpret this? So one thing is that what you have on the right-hand side is if people watch the videos. So of course, because you can send text messages to people, but if they don't read them, and they don't watch the videos, etc., then it's just like you have no treatment. So the first question you want to ask is, did you have really a treatment? The answer is yes or no. Yes, because the number of times people read the videos at the beginning, so these are the different videos that were sent over time. So the rate at which people looked at the videos is rather high, but it's rather high at the beginning. And you see that after a couple of weeks, people get bored a little bit with this. It remains not too small, but much lower than at the beginning. So it's possible that in fact the true treatment did not last the full academic year, but was very effective early on time, and then not that strong. So that's one interpretation. Another interpretation is because we don't only have the text messages, but we also send books. Maybe this would explain why we have impacts on reading dimensions of practices and not on other dimensions. It's a possibility, but in our surveys, we realize that even those relatively poor families, they do have books. So it doesn't seem like we are changing their lives completely by sending books. So this might be an explanation. It's not like a very obvious explanation. Another, I think, a problem, maybe failure of the design, is we have children in daycare centers. So it's possible that in daycare centers, parents already receive advice, or that children are already properly stimulated the whole day by professionals. It's not sure, but it's a possibility. And in that case, the marginal additional value of our treatment is in fact relatively small. And maybe it would have made more sense to start with parents whose children are not at all in daycare center, who are cared for their parents, for their poor parents full time. And therefore, maybe the intervention would have had a larger impact. And the last question, the last aspect which is important is in fact the targeting. So what we find in the data, we have baseline data on parent practices. And what you see here is the share of parents who have who apply the practices for which we ask, about which we asked them. And you see that, in fact, a large share of parents implement the practices that we want to encourage with the intervention to start with, so that there is a small margin of improvement. So maybe it's because they are daycare center parents. Maybe it's because we don't target enough the poorest of the poorest parents. But clearly, the intervention has a targeting problem. And what you see is that, in fact, the parents for which we have stronger impacts are the parents for which it's not huge, right? But it is there. The parents, so it's always the right-hand side column compared to the left-hand side. Right-hand side blue, left-hand side green. The practices of the parents on which we have higher effect at baseline are in fact lower than the average. So maybe we have effects where the practices we have more effect where the practices are low to start with. But generally, the practices are too high in our population that we should hope for a very strong impact of the intervention. And it's true also of the younger children. And the younger children, parents have a lower initial level of practice. Okay, so because this is very short, basic conclusions are, okay, we don't have such a strong effect here. We try to understand why. And probably there is an issue of targeting. We did not manage to target the proper people because the practices we want to improve are in fact more common than we might think initially. And the other thing is that probably 30% of the standard deviation anyway is rather a small impact. And if you want to hope to see something on the children that would be visible statistically on relatively small sample, you need probably much stronger impact to get something. Okay, so I'm going to stop here to try to keep with the time I was allocated.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think we'll move on to Lisa's presentation and then we'll be able to discuss what you've presented so far. So Lisa, you may share your screen. And turn on your mic also. Don't hesitate if you have questions. Okay. Your mic is off though.
Sorry.
No problem.
That's okay.
All right.
Oops. Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for Camille and Coralie to organize this event. So today with Marion, we will present to you Premiers Cris. Premiers Cris is less advanced than the project of Marc. It's a very new initiative. Premiers Cris is the early childhood research collaboratory of Le Cris at Paris. And Premiers Cris has been co-founded by Marion and I. So I'm Lisa, and I have a PhD in cognitive sciences, and currently I'm working at the Cris. I'm doing a postdoc, a part-time postdoc, and the rest of the time I'm working on the Premiers Cris project with Marion.
And I'm Marion, I'm a PhD student. My background is in architecture and design. So first I didn't know anything about cognitive development, but then I met Lisa and together we created Premiers Cris as an initiative to actually combine knowledge in design and creation and knowledge in cognitive science on early child development.
First, we would like to start with a short history of Premiers Cris, because if we understand well, today you are interested by people who are in the academia and move out of the academia. And so this is, Premiers Cris is an example of this. So we launched Premiers Cris with Marion in September 2018. At this time, we were both PhD students at the Cris. And for the 2 first years of Premiers Cris, what we did is to organize live events at the Cris, and also we developed 2 projects. The first project is the Igloo. It's an interactive space for young children, and it's also a research tool, an ecological research tool. It's a kind of a lab outside the lab. And if you are interested in this part, we can discuss it later. And the second project is the MOOC, maybe.
The MOOC is on, the topic is on early childhood and digital literacy. We actually interviewed 40 people who are practitioners, researchers, families, designers, and entrepreneurs around this topic. And the MOOC will be out and launched in next January. So actually all our projects are actually documented in our platform Premiers Cris. We will give you the link at the end of the presentation and you can have access to these two projects.
Yes. And the next step for Premiers Cris is to develop collaborative research projects. We will start with the first project hopefully in January or maybe this year, next year. And we are able to develop this project because we obtained a 2-year partnership with a non-profit organization. So this is for the short history of Premiers Cris. Now a more detailed presentation. So first, why did we create Premiers Cris with Marion when we met each other? Because of 3 observations. The first observation was that childcare professionals need a better recognition for their work. The second one was maybe more from my side. So I did my PhD in a baby lab in Paris at the ENCC. And from this, I know that early childhood research and cognitive research and research more generally is facing challenges, and more precisely the reproducibility crisis. And we want to tackle this problem.
And for that, we think that we can benefit to the design methodology because I know that maybe you're not familiar with design methodology, but this kind of methodology and way of thinking is more and more developed right now, and it's more and more, I don't know how to say that, but a lot of public policies are adopting this methodology in order to face really big problems such as education problems or even environmental crisis. So I think we should also benefit from this kind of way of thinking for early childhood research, and especially in the fact that we can have an ecological approach and actually involve all stakeholders from the design process to the data collection and even the communication process, but we will show you that after.
And so based on these 3 elements, we decided to create Premiers Cris with this big mission. So at the crossroads of science and design, Premiers Cris brings an interdisciplinary community into a collaborative research process. This approach, combining scientific methodology and creativity, values the experience of early childhood stakeholders and seeks to rethink research practices. And in this way, Premiers Cris aims to improve childcare and reduce inequalities from early on. So this is a very big mission, but this is what we hope to do in the next 2 years.
And it's also because we benefit of the partnership with this non-profit organization that is really aware about the childcare and the reduction of inequalities, especially in low say that
social status family.
Exactly.
And now we would like to present the strategic objectives of Premiers Cris, and I think maybe this part can interest those of you who would like to create their own project. So this schema is not something that we were able to do 1 year ago, and for this we benefit of the help of an external consultant, Solène Edouard, She is a specialist of childhood
care and education.
Yes, childhood care and education, and she is also a specialist of a young woman project, and she helped us to think about Premiers Cris and to figure out what we would like to do with this project. And so we wrote a strategic plan, and in this strategic plan we developed these 5 strategic objectives. The first one, and it's an important one when you're starting a new project, is to become a long-term organization. So Marion and I are working at the CRI, but we also have a community
Of actors.
Yes, and people working with us. And the objective is also to be economically to survive economically and to find a way to pay ourselves and people who are working with us. Mm-hmm. The second objective is to develop methodological guidelines for collaborative research in early childhood. We just finished last week to write the methodological guidelines, and we will present it later. And now we are creating the training courses online and in classroom for professionals and researchers. And the next step, starting in December, will be to train and involve childhood professionals and researchers in science and design.
The third objective, so this is the second actually, but the third one will be the implementation of collaborative research project. So for that we are going to co-create action or practice-based research project, and gather actually a practice-based research team, including a childcare institution and childcare professional, as well as science and design research teams. And the point is really the goal is really to apply our methodological guidelines. That's why they will be first trained to our own methodology, and then we can actually apply these methodological guidelines all together in a research project. And for that, I'm sorry, we are also developing 2 research tools. The first one is the Igloo, the one we mentioned earlier. The Igloo is actually a mobile lab, a lab outside the lab. And we are working now on a data collection app. And for that, we will be really glad to talk about this project with you also. Oh, sorry.
And the next objective is to maintain our scientific legitimacy, and maybe this point is important for people in the academia, and I think 1 or 2 years ago I was still afraid to go outside of the academia because of this, because it's very important for me to keep this scientific part in my daily work. And we decided with Marion not to quit the scientific world, but to continue and to try to write scientific contributions and to disseminate our work in the scientific world, but also to a broader audience.
And finally, the last objective is to federate an interdisciplinary community. As we mentioned earlier, we can't apply, or we can't even realize all this research project without the involvement of interdisciplinary actors. So for that, we have actually created an interactive platform. For the moment, it's just a platform that informs people about our project, but we believe that in a few months we will have an interactive platform. So for example, child care professional, as well as child ICE teacher, as well as researcher can also work and interact together around our research project, but maybe around broader question, we'll see.
And very quickly, the methodology we developed with Marion and other people working at Premiers Cris. So our methodology is in 8 steps. We hope that this to build project that for a 1-year project. And so the first step is to define the research topic. So it's a very large topic, for example, language development. And this part will be done by the Premiers Cris team. The second step is the state of the art. So basically there is a literature review, but also all the ecological experiences from the people working on the field. So for example, for the childcare professionals or the teachers, and also the benchmark.
And before the state of the art, between like the research topic defined by Premiers Cris team and the state of the art, we will gather the interdisciplinary team composed of researcher in design and science, and as well as childhood professional. And the state of the art will be actually a step that we will make all together. That's why there's actually 3 different kind of state of the art. And the benchmark is actually something that we used to do in design, and is actually collect all the projects related on a topic that we can find. For example, if we're talking about game design, I don't know, or a language development, maybe we can find some toys, or we can find some objects that are actually been done or even commercialized in order to develop this kind of objective.
The third step is to define the research framework. So it consists in the analysis of the state of the art, and on the definition of a research challenge. So it's not a problematic, it's really a challenge faced by people on the field on a daily basis. And also to define the actions that can respond to this challenge, and to define the evaluation of these actions.
The fourth one will be the experimental scenario, and I think is the part of the research methodology that is really the innovative part of this methodology, because it's actually the meeting between Lisa's methodology and my design methodology. So we will first define together the space and time framework of our experimentation. Then we will write the narrative lines that will be guided by what we call a mediator, and this mediator is of course a childhood professional, and it can be guided by the researchers as well. We will have data collection, so we will have tools to help childhood professionals to collect data. We will also develop one device, and this is this device that will be used by the participants in order to answer our research topic or big research question, and we will define all the methodology that we want to use if we want to do some interviews of children, or if you would just want to do some observation, or maybe mix both, and we want to collect only quantitative or also quantitative and qualitative data, for example.
And one precision, so I think what is different from the classic research methodology we used in science is most of the time in our experimental protocols, we are very focused on how the experimental design can help to respond to our research questions, but we don't really care about the user experience, about the child experience, or the people who are taking care of the child experience. So to use this experimental scenario that is based on the child experience.
So the fifth?
Yes, the fifth is the exploratory part. So the prototyping by the designer, the iterations, and the finalization of the device and all the experimental scenario. And the next step is the experimentations. So the experimentations take place in the childcare institutions, and all the experimentations and measurements are done by the childcare professionals. And for this, the benefits of the help of mentors. So we have the budget because of this partnership to engage people to go each week in each childcare institutions and to help the professionals to run the experimentations.
And we have already some PhD students or master students that maybe want to work with us so far.
Yes. And the next step is the analysis and interpretation of the results. So classically, we will analyze and represent the results, but also we will confront the result to the professionals' experiences on the field. And by this, our goal is to help them to have a reflexive experience on what they are doing and
how they are actually dealing or facing a lot of problems every day with children.
Yes, and for us, it's a really important part because we don't want the research conclusions to be something kind of top-down, only coming from the analysis of the researcher of the data, but something that is shared by all the members of the project.
That's why we also write it like a policy, a way, like, I don't know what say that, but we wrote a document that allow us to say that we will have like a horizontal vision of knowledge. We will have also a lot of communication, a lot of meeting to work all together, and that we really want the people involved in our project that feel well and to support the well-being of childhood professionals.
Yes. And the last part is the communication. So as we said, the scientific contributions, but also the dissemination to a larger audience.
So yeah.
And so yes, thank you very much for listening to us. And so this is our email address and the Premiers Cris platform on internet. And as Marion said, in the next for the next year, we will need people to help us. So we need people to teach during the training sessions, and also people to go
to be mentors.
Yes, to be mentors. So if you are interested in, please contact us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I hope we weren't too long.
Yes.
All right, so now we're going to take questions. So it's good to remember that these sessions, or the seminar, is really to talk about alternatives to academia. So you don't need to ask questions specifically about their project or about a method, let's say. Please don't hesitate to ask them questions about their career paths and what motivated them to do what they're doing today. And so, as it is a tradition at the DEC, we'll be taking questions from students first. So master's and doctorate students. So if you would like to speak, I think...
I have a question, if I may.
Yes, you may.
So first of all, thank you for both presentations, which are very inspiring for me, given the subjects on which I would like to be working in the future, which are related to childhood. I have two questions. First is like, what is the public policy links of these projects? Like, for both projects, do you have a connection to decision makers, or simply to those who manage this kind of interventions, but at the level of public policy and public funding? And the other question is more specifically for the Premiers Cris project. So I'm very inspiring for me because I come from rather public policy. I have been working a lot on participatory dynamics in social work, and like now I'm starting working on my research project, and I was kind of frustrated of the very few participatory side of most of research methodologies I have been like facing, and I find your approach is could probably respond to my desire to have these both parts, the research and the more participatory side. But I wonder whether there is a risk that this kind of methodology, and generally speaking, recherche action approach, whether it could reduce, let's say, the scientific acceptability of the results. Because you can't have, in my understanding, the same quality standards when you do, for instance, an exhaustive literature review, and when you do benchmark, or like you consult professionals, you make focus groups with them, and so on. So is there any risk that you have identified, and any pathways to reduce this risk?
Thank you very much for all your questions and your enthusiastic position. So for the first thing about the policies, so we are working with and I think it's an NGO. It's called
Philanthropy Advisors.
Yes, and they are helping us to write what is called politique des publics fragiles for Premiers Cris. So we are like building all the rules that will help us not to hurt the children, and also the professionals.
But I think the question was more how our project can actually have an impact on public policies, no? Or maybe
yes, at local level or at national level, but mostly maybe in local level, like the cities, the counties.
It's okay, but it was really important to say that we also worked a lot to actually like write a public on like a policy on fragile public. So what we're working with this non-profit organization, we can't actually say the name because they don't really want us to spread the name, so sorry about that. But this organization is actually an organization from the Netherlands, and they work a lot with early childhood care and education policies all around the world. And what they have also an office in Paris, and they actually have a lot of impact in public policies, but this is not the part that we want to do. We want just to develop like research project, and maybe they can actually base their public policies on our research project. But it's not Lisa and I who are going to do, as you say, a plaidoyer, but we will yes, we will definitely hope that our project will have an impact, especially in terms of the way we do research on early childhood, and also the as we mentioned earlier, the fact that the early child professionals are doing an amazing work with children, and they have to be support more and more. I don't remember the first question, but I remember that I wanted to say something.
Maybe Marc, you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
No problem. No, regarding the public policy implication. So yes, obviously, in the kind of work I do, there usually is a lot of direct implication for policy. In the example,
yes, you mentioned it for the project. That's why I got this question.
For this very project. So the project is designed by this NGO, which is called Mille et un mots. So it's a very local policy, if you like, in that sense. It's not like a national public policy or something like this. But clearly, the objective for them is to learn about their process and to improve their process. So frankly, the results are a bit disappointing. But they took it very well. Sometimes we work with NGOs that from the moment that the impact are bad, the relationship deteriorates very strongly. In this case, they took it very, very, very well, and they just try to understand what we learned from this. And now they have a second round. They have a new beta design that they are working on to try to improve on what they're doing, learning whatever they can learn from this experiment. So really, yes, it does have impacts on policy.
Thank you very much. And the second question was rather for Premiers Cris about this methodology, which is mixing design and best research practices. Is there a risk of reduction of scientific acceptability of results or not? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I remember when Marc was talking and I said, yes, I remember. So what Lisa mentioned also at the beginning of the presentation, that there's actually like also a crisis, reproducibility, I don't know, reproductibility even in French. And I know that there's also some problems in scientific way.
Oh, we didn't hear you very well there. You're stuck.
And the real world, I would say. And what we try to do with Premiers Cris is actually building bridge between these two. So maybe it can be really scary first for scientific to do scientific research in a childcare institution and so on. But we really hope that our methodology will be as clear and as, I don't know, say, rigorous as possible.
Yes, and maybe to complete what Marion said, I think there is an equilibrium to find between only do research inside of the lab with a very controlled protocol, and I think this kind of research is really necessary to have discover new things about babies or children. And on the other side, it's also something very important to do some research that are more ecological. So I think it's good if both can exist, and our objective is not that all the research change and become a research action, but we think that to do this collaborative way of doing research maybe can add something in the field of childhood education or child development.
Thank you.
Right, so if you have a question, please don't hesitate.
Yeah, so I would have a question. My question would be for the Lab Premiers Cris, but it bounces back on Marc Gurgand's point that maybe, so you said that maybe you didn't target enough the poorest of the poorest of the poor. My point is that we know that there are great inequalities on childcare access, and that the most of the underprivileged population do not access childcare center. So my question would be, in the perspective of reducing inequalities, maybe what methodology should we invent to also be able to test on children of this population? So I don't know, maybe to put some devices in healthcare centers, waiting rooms, or something like that. So I was just thinking if you were only focused on childcare centers, or whether you were thinking about I don't know, other places in which you could, I don't know, I hope I've been clear.
Yeah, sure. So the organization we are working with, they are really aware about all the childhood inequalities. They're working on that topic for many, many years. And what they ask us is that 30% of our projects, so I mean 1/3 of our childhood or institution or places will be in the QPV, so Quartier Prioritaire de la Ville. So for that, we also try to build a partnership with different environments. And the second part of the question is that, yes, we really hope that we can also import our project or put our project in different childhood institutions. And we also thought about public libraries or cultural institutions such as museums, or for example, the 104, which is in the 19th arrondissement also, and or La Villette, La Cité des Sciences, and they also have a big impact in this area of Paris. So, but maybe somewhere else, but for the moment, that's true. That's the beginning of the project. So we are actually in Paris, but we hope that in the future we will have other institutions. So yeah. And especially, I can say that especially as a designer, I was really aware about building a partnership with cultural institutions. And Lisa was really agreeing with that.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, could you say more about the app you talked about, and whether it could be used in other places at childcare? I'm not sure I really understood what it was about.
For the moment, we have a collaboration with the MindLogger app. So it's an app that has been developed between the CRI and the Childman Institute in New York. But for a year, we had some trouble to actually export the app in France because of the RGPD and so on. So we know that all our data should be in France. And that was actually a big step to do. So we talked to the CRI and we said that we will have an internal server at the CRI. So yeah, it is like the first part of this project, and now we are still working with them, and we are developing this app like on a smartphone, and we hope that we can give the smartphone directly to the I don't know, it could be mediator in a cultural center, or it can be childhood professional. We will provide them the smartphone so they can answer the question, and the data are not open to all. Okay. She asked if as a researcher you can have access to this app. And for the moment we're just building the app, and then if like the first result are actually good, all the CRI that the project that we are developing at CRI are totally open source. So basically we will, and if you want to be involved in the conversation, that would be also a great thing to do all together. And what just the last point is that for this app, we also work a lot on user experience design. And that means that you can answer the question by different means. So it means that you can take picture, you can answer question by setting something on vocal interface. You can also have like little gradation lines, little emojis. So yeah, we worked a lot on like different way to add results.
Thank you, Laurine.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any more questions? Maybe from researchers also that are attending today?
Yeah, I have questions for Marc, if nobody else wants to.
Go ahead.
So Marc, since you showed that that the watching of videos declined quite steeply over time, this would suggest an analysis restricted to those families who actually watch the videos, right? Which are those who might have implemented an intervention, and to exclude those who did not really participate in the intervention, wouldn't it?
Yes, in principle, but as you know, you can't do that because you don't know who is a control group. Are the people who wouldn't have watched or who would have watched the videos. So you would end up comparing a selected sample of, I don't know, the most motivated parents with the full population represented by the control group. So there's no way you can do that unless you do find predetermined variables, gender, social origin, or whatever, that are strongly connected with reading or not reading the videos. Then you take a slice of your sample. They are similar in the control and the treatment group. And you have a treatment group where the rate at which they watch the video is maybe higher than in the full population. This is the only thing you could do in practice. But of course, then you would confound the characteristics that you use to slice the sample with the fact that people read videos more or less. You wouldn't know where the heterogeneity comes from. So at the end of the day, it is something that is extremely difficult to do. As always, I mean, the only robust thing that you really can do is reduce form. And if your intervention was doesn't have high compliance rate, you're dead. I think that's the story. There's no way out. There's no way to survive this, I think.
And well, there's a secondary question following on this, which is compliance is one important thing, but then not just compliance, but the way they do it, right? I mean, the issue here is that you're targeting a group of parents that have a low education, that may have a not very good fluency in French. You're asking them to perform a reading intervention, but maybe the way they do it is completely inefficient. Do you have
so it depends. Yeah. So okay. So that's a deep question. It depends what is your parameter of interest. If my parameter of interest is policy, then I'm providing the right answer. At the end of the day, yes, I'm doing these text messages, and it's useless because those guys are not reading the text messages because they take the extreme example. They don't read French. So my policy is very bad because I send text messages in French to people who don't read French. So it has zero effect, and there's a good reason for that. That's the policy level, you see. What you're asking, you want a deeper question, which is what happens when people read the text? The treatment is reading the text, and I'd like to know what happens when people read the text, not when you send stupid text messages to people who can't read them. Again, it's a bit it's a bit difficult to answer this question with the material we have. You would need, for instance, to have two arms of the experiment, one in Arabic and one in French. So we had the surveys in Arabic, actually, but we didn't have the intervention in Arabic. So you would like to have two samples, two arms, one in French, one in Arabic. Then you look at if you get a stronger result on the Arabic-speaking population when you send it. Then we would get into the kind of aspects of the question you're asking for. So you need a design that is much richer than the design that we have to answer the deeper question that you want to answer. So I want to be very modest here. We have a simple design and we can only answer very reduced form intention to treat questions. And there's a lot of interesting points that we can't honestly document. I don't know if it is a very, I know it's a frustrating answer, but this is the way I would put it.
But then I wonder, I mean, do we have evidence from other studies that there are some cases where parent-mediated interventions can work when actually the parents themselves are part of the problem that we're trying to solve?
So the other text messages interventions that exist, so there's a California team who has a paper, and there's also there's also an experiment in France they do have quite large impacts with text messages on parents, but it's at the kindergarten level, and it's targeted at reading skills. So it's much more specific. It has a clearer objective, and it's older children. So probably it's different, but it can work. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to take maybe one more question, if there is one. Don't hesitate to ask your question in the chat.
I still have one in backup in case there's an opportunity to
Okay,
ask.
well, then do it, and then maybe that'll give somebody else the chance to come up with a question and to ask it afterwards. We can take 2 more questions, that's fine.
Okay, so it's a more controversial question for Marc again. So this echoes discussions that I've had with other colleagues recently. So as you probably know, genetic predispositions are one factor that influence the ability of children to learn language and to learn to read, which of course you do not control at all in your setup. That's understandable, but these kind of factors may both be confounded with some social factors of interest, and they may also modulate the response of children to interventions. So in principle, it would seem interesting to be able to measure them and control them. Do you, as a social scientist, if you had a cheap opportunity to measure children's genetic predispositions for language, would you find an interest in measuring them to improve your research?
Definitely, yes. So what I would do if I had this data, then I would stratify my randomization by the values of these endowments, and therefore compare the impacts. Of course, it will be, the thing is that it will be confounded. So what is going to be tricky is that it will remain confounded with, let's say, parents' education, if they are correlated. So even if I stratify, so I would need to stratify very, very strongly by, let's say, parents' education and genetic endowments, so that in my heterogeneous effect analysis, I can control those. But of course, there will always be missing dimensions. So if I stratify by education and of the parents, then you will tell me, yes, but income matters. No, I stratify by income and something else matters. So it will be at the end, strictly speaking, difficult to answer exactly the kind of question you want to answer. But I guess, yes, you could get relatively close to it by stratifying randomization on, so you need to have the information, the genetic information before randomization, then randomize, etc. I mean, you could do it even if you have it after, but it's cleaner to do it before. So of course, yes, that would be extremely interesting. I don't trust that we can do this one day, but.
In fact, it's being done already in a number of studies in the United States.
Yeah, yes, I had friends in mind. Okay, no, I agree. Why is it controversial? Because some people would ethically not want to do this?
Some people don't want even to believe that there are genetic factors involved. So they will do anything to oppose it.
But you don't need to believe it to test it empirically, right?
You tell them.
Okay. I get the point.
All right. Do we have one more question? Okay, well, there's one in the chat. So we're going on with the controversy. What would be a point in doing this if there can be no intervention change possible? Do you want to answer this, Marc?
My other point was that the response to intervention might depend on genetic predispositions. So there might be an interaction between genetic endowment and the effect of the intervention. So that would be interesting to investigate in itself, and maybe to identify for which kind of public precisely this kind of intervention may work.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, so we're going to close the session. Thank you so much for coming today. We had some very interesting talks. So I recorded the session. It'll be available, I think, next week on the site of on the website of the DEC, specifically on the DEC AltAC program website page. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.